Walter Green was an old black man who had given up everything to raise two abandoned children he found in an alley. Decades later, the same world he'd sacrificed for turned on him. His ruthless boss framed him for a crime, and the courtroom filled with whispers, calling him a thief, a liar, a man unworthy of mercy. Shackled, with his hope fading fast, Walter waited as the judge prepared to hand down a life sentence. But just as the gavel was about to strike, two figures stood up, and what they revealed would shake the entire courtroom to its core. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us share more stories like this one. Stick around till the end, and if Walter's story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now let's begin. That winter was the kind that bit through old coats and cracked boots. The kind that made even strong men bow their heads against the wind. In small factory towns, the streets smelled of smoke, oil, and cold steel. People hurried home, pretending not to see whoever was left behind. At the end of a long shift, Walter Green, a weary man in his late 50s with a limp that never healed, shuffled down the street. His boss always said he was too slow, too old, too useless. Walter never argued. He just took the insults, swallowed the pain, and kept working. That night, while passing a narrow alley behind a diner, he heard the hum of freezer fans mixing with the wind's whistle. There, huddled beside a dumpster, were two children, pale, shivering, and wrapped in thin, torn clothes. The boy had his arm around his little sister, trying to shield her from the cold. Walter stopped. He could have kept walking, like everyone else. His boss's voice echoed in his mind. Don't waste time on strays. You can barely feed yourself. And he wasn't wrong. Walter's meals were scraps, his room barely warm. But when he looked at those kids, something inside him stirred, a pull stronger than hunger. He crouched down, knees creaking. The children stared up, eyes far too old for their age. You two got anywhere to go? He asked softly. Silence. Just a small shake of the head. Walter sighed, his breath fogging in the air. He knew what it meant to be invisible, to be left behind. Not tonight, he said quietly, reaching out his rough, calloused hand. Come on. The boy hesitated, but the girl slipped her tiny, freezing fingers into his palm. That was enough. By the time they reached his small apartment, neighbors peeked through cracked doors. That fool, one muttered. Old man can't feed himself. Now he's dragging home strays. Another chuckled. He'll sink with them. Walter heard. He always did. But he just kept walking, two fragile shadows following behind. His apartment wasn't much. Peeling wallpaper, a sagging couch, a heater that rattled louder than it warmed. Still, he spread blankets on the couch, warmed a bit of broth, and watched the kids eat like they hadn't seen food in days. That night, as he rubbed his aching leg in the corner, Walter thought about how his boss would mock him again tomorrow, how money would stretch thinner than ever. But he also knew one thing. Those children wouldn't be sleeping on frozen concrete anymore. Not while he was alive. And with that quiet decision, something unbreakable formed, a bond that would echo louder than he could ever imagine. The days that followed were hard. Walter worked in the steel factory where the air burned like iron and every clang of machinery rattled his bones. His boss, Mr. Harlan, was a man who enjoyed cruelty. He'd wait for silence on the floor before shouting, "Green, even those orphans you picked up probably move faster than you." Laughter followed, some forced, some eager. Walter never fought back. He just wiped the sweat from his brow and kept going. Every insult, every glare, he carried home with his limp. But the moment he opened his front door, all that weight disappeared. Eli, the boy, would greet him with a book in his hands, excited to read what he'd learned at school. Grace, his little sister, sat at the rickety table, sketching warm, happy homes she dreamed of. Walter gave them his meals when cupboards were bare. He patched Eli's jacket with clumsy stitches. He saved coins for Grace's shoes. On nights when the heater coughed and died, he huddled them close, pretending he wasn't cold himself. The neighbors whispered again. "He'll end up on the street with them," one woman said. Another smirked. "A black man raising two white kids? They'll turn on him first chance they get." Walter heard, but he never answered. He just kept teaching Eli how to change a tire, how to shake a hand with pride. He taught Grace how to count coins, how to stand tall even when the world tried to shrink her. Still, Harlan never let him forget his place. When Walter once asked for a day off to take Grace to the clinic, Harlan sneered, "You're not their father. Stop playing hero and get back to work." But Walter went anyway. He walked Grace to the clinic, hand in hand, knowing the cost. That night, when he saw his pay cut in half, he folded the slip, tucked it in his pocket, and said nothing. Years passed like that, one quiet sacrifice after another. The children grew. Eli, sharp-eyed and sharper-minded, earned the scholarships Harlan said he'd never deserve. Grace, once the quiet little girl with a pencil, became a fierce voice in school debates, unafraid to defend the man who saved her life. Walter watched with quiet pride. His limbs grew heavier, his back more bent each passing year. But the kid stood taller. For the first time, Walter allowed himself to believe. Maybe kindness wasn't wasted. Maybe it planted something that would bloom long after him. What he didn't know was that Harlan had been watching too, growing bitter as he saw Walter build a family from scraps. By the time Eli and Grace went off to college, Walter's body carried decades of labor. His hands were rough as stone, his steps slower than ever, but his heart swelled with pride each time a letter arrived. Eli studying law, Grace chasing journalism. He pinned their notes on his peeling wall like treasures. Mr. Harlan, however, hadn't softened. The years had only sharpened his spite. He hated seeing Walter walk with his head held higher, hated hearing whispers that the orphans were making something of themselves. To him, it was proof that Walter had stolen dignity he didn't deserve. Then one autumn morning, the trap was sprung. Walter came home to find two policemen waiting by his door, uniforms crisp, expressions cold. A neighbor watched from her window, muttering, "Told you so." Always knew he'd end up in trouble. The officers shoved past him, tearing through his modest apartment. From under the couch cushion, they pulled a small bag stuffed with cash and factory equipment. Walter's breath caught. He'd never seen it before. Within hours, he was in handcuffs, the metal biting into his wrists. Harlan stood outside the factory gates, arms folded, smirking as Walter was led away. "Guess kindness doesn't pay after all," he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Some laughed. Others turned away. The courtroom smelled of varnish and dust. Walter sat hunched, his once strong shoulders sagging. Prosecutors painted him as a bitter old man who'd stolen to survive. Witnesses, workers Harlan had quietly paid, claimed they'd seen Walter sneaking around the storage rooms. Bystanders whispered, knew he was too good to be true. Walter said little. He wanted to scream, but years of swallowing insults had trained him to stay silent. He thought of Eli and Grace, but he couldn't drag them into this shame. Better they stay away. Better they never see him like this. When the judge's gavel struck, life sentence possible, the room seemed to close in. The air grew thin. Walter's eyes dropped, his heart heavy with one last thought. Maybe Harlan was right. Maybe a man like him was never meant to rise above his place. Then the courtroom doors creaked open. Two figures stepped inside, confident, unshaken. Eli and Grace. No longer the shivering children he once carried home, but adults now, shaped by the sacrifices he thought had gone unseen. The room stirred. Whispers turned to gasps. Harlan's smirk faltered for the first time. Walter's chest tightened. He hadn't wanted them here. But as Eli set down a stack of legal files and Grace lifted her recorder, he realized something he'd never let himself believe. His kindness had come full circle. The battle wasn't over. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Eli straightened his tie and stepped forward. Gone was the timid boy who once hid in alleys. He stood tall, voice steady, introducing himself as Walter's defense attorney. Papers slammed onto the table, files thick with evidence. Grace positioned herself in the gallery, recorder flashing red. She wasn't there to watch. She was there to expose the truth. The prosecution tried to press on, but Eli tore their case apart piece by piece. Witnesses faltered under his questions. One stammered, another contradicted himself. Eli exposed every lie with precision. Then came the bombshell. Grace rose, requesting to submit her report, detailing Harlan's history of wage theft, harassment, and falsified accounts at the factory, backed by documents she had unearthed. Murmurs swept the room. Harlan's face flushed red, fists clenching. Walter sat frozen, eyes stinging. He had thought the children he saved had moved on. But here they were, wielding the fire he'd unknowingly passed to them. The judge leaned back, tapping his pen. "It seems," he said slowly, "this entire case was built on manipulation. He looked at Walter, then at Harlan. "The charges are dismissed." Gasps filled the room. Applause followed. A few jeers trailed Harlan as he stormed out, defeated. Eli placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. Grace moved beside him, whispering, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." "Dad," that single word, "Dad," echoed louder than the gavel that freed him. Neighbors who once mocked him fell silent. Reporters scribbled furiously as Walter, old and weary, finally straightened his back and met the world with clear eyes. He had once lifted 2 children out of the cold. 20 years later, they had lifted him out of a cage. Because kindness doesn't die. It waits, it grows, and when the time is right, it saves. When Walter chose kindness decades ago, he never imagined it would one day save his life. This story reminds us, every act of compassion plants a seed that might return when we need it most. If you want more powerful stories of justice, sacrifice, and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and click on the next video. You won't want to miss what happens there.